So to start us off, let me give you a bit of context just on our business. I said we've been in business for about 20 years, and our starting point was actually as futurists. So we did a lot of data analysis, and we used to summarize, and you guys might be familiar with it even to this day. I deal with it all the time, but it's what I call deal with the tower of guilt. And that's all the stuff that you're committed to reading because they're important articles and books that people give you, and then you put it on the pile, right? And then you get more, and you put it on the pile. And then in order to not feel terrible about the pile, you sort of, after a while, take the old stuff out and throw it away so the pile seems manageable. Well, that's kind of what we did for executives. We said, what's the most critical information you need to know in a consumable fashion, right? And we did that, and it was quite good. What that would also lead to is, more often than not, we'd get invited to executive offsites where we talked about strategy because we had provocative data and information, right? And that would happen at, whether it's wineries, whether it's golf course resorts, whatever places the dialogue took place, and sometimes it was over a couple of days, sometimes it was a couple of meetings over the course of many months, and inevitably, we ended up with what we thought was a great place, and along with our clients, we toasted our collective brilliance and handed off the big report, right? And said, here you are, you should be fine. Well, guess what happened, We checked in 3 months later, 6 months later, and we're like, hey, what happened to that great thinking we all did, And they'd sort of look for the report and kind of blow off the dust, like, we're not sure, And that was really that was in the mid-'90s, kind of a major change point for us, because more organizations we were working with, it was a matter of, there was a lot of good thinking, but then they got stuck, right? It's just nothing happened, or not as much happened as you'd want, and we really started looking. You see, we use a lot of pictures today, so we're kind of take a creative angle to things, but this is what we saw more often than not when we really started investigating. We call it the canyon, the execution canyon. So it's not about just the strategy itself and the content of it, but how do you bring it to life? How do you connect people to it? And here's what we saw. So we said in most organizations, you got leaders kind of trying to figure out, they got the different puzzle pieces, they're like, I think I know how this fits together. And then you got managers in the middle who often got thrown there, different responsibilities, right? Or often very good SMEs, but it's an entirely different skill set, trying to figure it out. What are they trying to do? It's often the hardest spot. You sort of feel on an island, right? And then you look at the front line, and kind of in the various, often silos that we work in, putting out fires, but often disconnected really from what was important to the organization, right? So a lot of disconnects. And by the way, I see this in just about every company, because we have marketplace changes. You see the tornado that are constantly putting pressure on an organization, so it's normal. And we have human beings working in organizations, so we all have different mindsets and perspectives. And so you will constantly have canyons, but the better organizations are the ones that recognize them quickly and then can address them effectively, right? Which goes to speed of change, and it's all about effective leadership and effective management, more so than anything else. Not doing it gets really expensive. The results here, 90% of all strategies aren't well executed. Wow, boy, what a lot of effort and time and money for things to not fully work. 35% of employees worldwide are highly engaged. Meaning there's a whole bunch that punch in and out and are indifferent, right? That's really costly. We can debate the numbers, but it's really, really costly in terms of speed, in terms of dollars, and then you have to ask the question, okay, what are we going to do about it, right? How can we address that? Because it's such a core reason for ineffective execution. So we decided to change our direction of our entire company. It's what's that old Yogi Berra saying? One of my favorite philosophers, old baseball player. When you see the fork in the road, take it. And we said, hey, wait a second, we want to solve those problems, right? So let's take that fork in the road. And so we've had the privilege now of working probably with over 150 of the Fortune 2000 over the last 20 years. And a couple of years ago, we took a look back and we said, hey, wait a second. Let's really look at the ones who really did it well and the ones who didn't. And what are some of the core lessons learned that might be worth sharing? And so, there's a whole bunch of interesting things, but there's 5 I picked out that I think are really relevant. And as you think about your role as a leader, as a manager, how do I drive effective engagement and change, and what's my role in it, and why is it maybe easy and why is it hard? And so I just want to take a few minutes to talk to you about those. The first one, roots of engagement. What really drives engagement, right? So it's kind of funny. We have a natural desire to want to be engaged. If you look at the activities we seek, I'll just share some of mine, but whether it's liking to go into Jimmy Buffett concert. I don't know what that says about me. Or I went to the World Cup soccer tournament a few years ago. But seeking activities, one of the crazy ones. For those of you who have kids, and my kids are 10 and 7 now. A couple of years ago, Harry Potter fanatics, and when the 7th book came out, and the bookstores opened at 12:01. One of the crazy ones. But whether it's, once again, dinner parties, whether it's, I'm going to put you on the spot, fantasy football. Who plays fantasy football? Or knows people who play fantasy football? What always amazes me is when we have a fantasy football league in our organization, right, and kind of across the board, everybody kind of participates in it. And I'm always amazed that the guys very much even at the front line with seemingly limited education, all of a sudden the sophistication of the moves that they can make, right? The analysis of trades and the value of players and the point system. It's just absolutely stunning to me how sophisticated all of a sudden the transactions are. And it's putting me to shame. You're like, wow, I'm finished last again. What do they think of me? But it's pretty amazing. So we seek engagement. We naturally want to be engaged. We find the time to do it. And when it happens, time flies, doesn't it? Time goes by fast. So we love to be engaged, just not at work. I mean, what's up with that? The place we spend the most time in our lives, and we have major disengagement problems, right? And so we got to address that. There's way too much opportunity out there. And then you have to ask the question, well, whose job is engagement? Well, to some degree, it's the job of every single one of us, right? We have to own our own engagement. But at the same point in time, it's the job of leaders and managers to create an environment that can foster it. And that's not easy, And so what I want to, and it's difficult. It's not easy. Why is it difficult to create and maintain? And so let me talk about a couple of things that we've seen are just really critical if you want to create an environment of engagement. The first root of engagement, and you've seen this, be a part of something bigger than yourself. We have a natural desire to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. Not just the daily tasks that we do, but be attached to something really meaningful. That's why we're sports fans. That's why we have all kinds of different hobbies. We want to attach ourselves to something more meaningful, right? So the question you have to ask is, how well do you do that? There's great examples out there, right? I mean, this is one of the most famous ones. This nation should commit itself to put a man on the moon and return him safely by the end of the decade. Very, very powerful, right? And there's stories out there that when people were touring NASA, and by the way, I had a chance to meet with Gene Kranz, in the Apollo 13 movie, the guy who was kind of trying to kind of land him, kind of bring him back safely to Earth. And I had a chance to ask him, I was like, so when this was happening, what was the environment like? He's like, we had absolutely no clue how to do it. Nothing. Nothing was even in place, right? But it was very inspiring. It's a very clean and a very crisp story. And that becomes very powerful. So there's, you could meet the janitor at NASA, and he'd say, I'm doing my part to put a man on the moon. How do you go beyond the task? How do you make it crisp and actionable? In corporate America today, and the Chip Heath, or made to stick, is that in most organizations, we take something this compelling, and I can't ever even remember it, and the statement he says is, this is what this would be in most of our strategy books today. Our mission is to become the international leader in the space industry through maximum team-centered innovation and strategically targeted aerospace initiatives. That's that, right? If you give it to most of us in the PowerPoint, that's not compelling. That's not how you connect people necessarily to it in a meaningful way, right? There's actually maybe the worst slide ever. This is how they talked about the complexity of the strategy about the Afghanistan war, and you see George McChrystal's content. When we understand that slide, we'll have won the war. Right? How often do we do that? Right? We get lost in the detail. We don't miss the story. As you think about your team, how well can your team connect what they do and what your team does to the larger purpose of the organization? But that becomes your job, telling that story. How do you make that crisp? How do you make that actionable? How do you make that understandable and compelling in a way that's not just intellectual, but it's emotional and it's meaningful? Because we have, once again, a natural desire to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. How do you tap into that? As a great leader, as a great manager, you tap into that. The second root of engagement, we have a desire to feel a sense of belonging. Who has kids who play sports? 4. Okay, all right, a lot of you. Me too. 2 girls, 10 and 7. And so it's in a more of a hypothetical scenario. Let's assume, and I used to play a lot of sports, so I couldn't wait for them to start, which, so you're always like, oh, don't be that parent. But, so your daughter comes and says, okay, I want to play soccer. And you're like, yes. And you do all the things that are sort of completely, first thing you do, you take her to the store and you buy her like the shin guards and the ball and everything else, which is sort of utterly ridiculous. But you're having fun. She's excited. Everybody's excited, right? You can't, this is great. Finally. And so you're very engaged in the whole process. And let's just hypothetically assume, so she starts practicing, and the team does their practice, and reasonably sort of competitive place, and the first game rolls around, and she doesn't really play, or gets in at the very back, and kind of when it's sort of not very important to play, and she comes back, and and you're a little dejected too, and what might you tell her? You'd probably go, well, keep working hard, do your thing, sure it'll work out, and that sort of stuff. Well, let's assume another week or two goes by and the same thing happens, right? You so become, you're still trying to be encouraged, but you're starting to kind of feel the pain for her, right? You're like, oh, please, You might even go, well, maybe if the person who plays in front of her just gets a little nick, just like a little, You're not really thinking it, but then you're thinking it a little bit, or maybe they get, but it's like amazing. So all of a sudden it starts changing, and she still doesn't get it. And now she becomes dejected, and she's not having a whole lot of fun. You're really disappointed because you want her to have fun and love it as much as you did, and it kind of keeps going, and you get more disengaged. And by the time the 4th or 5th week walks around, you might actually find yourself watching the team and not really rooting for it as much as you were in the beginning, right? Not really loving it as much. And my whole point in this whole thing is the sense of belonging started out really high and got lost very quickly. Within 5 weeks, it can change, right? And so just because you have it with your team doesn't mean you're going to keep it. It means you have to constantly work on it, especially as you look at your environment and how much change you're going through, right? Don't assume you have it. How do you create that sense of belonging, that connectivity? Because you're going to have people who feel like right now they're on the A team. You're going to have people who feel like on their B team. And you have a lack of and so it becomes a very conscious effort how you create that sense of belonging, how you have those conversations, because it can go very, very quickly. So kind of be aware of that in terms of a route of engagement. The third one, there we go. The third one, go on a meaningful journey and know that their contributions make a significant impact. Sudoku players. Boy, that's gone by the wayside, right? 2 years ago, it was like, wow, geez, Crossword puzzles. Well, a little better. How about gamers? Come on. We got a couple of gamers in the room. You can be truthful with us. If I asked you, well, why do you like doing it? The responses I'd probably get as well, it's a challenge. It gets me a sense of accomplishment. I like thinking about it and figuring it out. All those reasons why we spend a lot of time on those things, or some of us do, and it's fun, right? But the interesting thing is, as we think about strategy, and as we think about implementing strategy, what do? We often create the PowerPoint, and we tell people what it is, and then, man, we're ticked because they're not changing, right? We didn't take them on a journey, right? We have a natural desire. We want to solve our own puzzles. We want to be part of the process, right? But when we're not, we might go along, but it's not fully ours. And so the contribution that I make, the journey that I'm a part of, becomes really, really important to buy in, right? And at times we just have to do things because we have to do things, but it becomes a really, really important element. We have a natural desire to want to solve our own puzzles or be a part of that process. When it gets done to us, it's a lot harder to come along. So kind of keep that in mind in terms of great engagement. So in many ways, you guys are the chief engagement officers of your teams, right? And the ability to connect them to something larger, to create the sense of belonging, and to ultimately make sure that they have a meaningful contribution is one of the key elements. When we look at great organizations and not so great organizations, leaders are pretty good at that, right? Or they at least are very conscious of it. So that's one key element. Second one, common mental models. What does winning really look like? How do we think about things? And let me just do something really quickly. It's like, what do you see here? What does that look like? I don't know. What was that? Home on a rooster. That's a good one. Anything else? Yeah, okay. Okay. Medal for him. Very good. Oh, yeah, see, you're way ahead of most people. Very good. So now, actually, it's a rooster. But now what is it? That's actually somebody looking at a rooster. Now, now we're in a house, somebody looking at a rooster. Oh, it's actually on a farm. Cover of a magazine that somebody's holding. The point in all this, sort of very rapid breakdown, is perspective matters, right? Where you sit gives you a very different view of the truth, right? And many of us, when we're in leadership positions, we've forgotten what it's like not to know. We've forgotten what it's like not to know. And so I can't go backwards, this only goes forward. But I'd go back and say, but depending on the perspective that you have a very different view of the truth or of reality. And so as leaders, we have to make sure we explain and provide context, right? Because perspective matters, and we might have a very different perspective. And things get lost in translation. So we don't have a common view of what winning looks like and what success looks like. So perspective is hugely critical. And so is shared meaning. What do you think of, just kind of picture it in your head, when I say the word bear? I'll give you a second. And if I asked you, some would say a brown bear. Some would say a bear market. Some would say a grizzly bear. Some would say bear aspirin. And so on and so forth. Meaning you associate a different meaning and a different picture with the word. Right? And all too often when it comes to strategy, the execution of something, we have common words, but we have very different meaning. I could put customer service up there. Do we have a truly shared definition of what we mean by that? Right? Safety, cost savings, but there's often a disconnect between words and meaning. It becomes really, really important in terms of making sure we have a common definition of success. So what great leaders do, what great managers do, is make sure that common mental model exists, whether it's through dialogue or other means. We make sure we have clarity. Some we're going to engage you in later on. How do we make sure we're going to have clarity of what this really looks like for us, right? And we all will have a chance to have our input in it. But a really, really important element. We often lack the effective mental models to create shared meaning. So that's item number 2. The metaphor here, and I think it's relevant and applies, is we often only see one piece of the puzzle, right? And absent seeing the top box, I mean, I'm dorky enough where I did this because I was going to, I was like, I'm going to want to use the puzzle metaphor. So, but if you try to build a puzzle without knowing what the top looks like, and then you build it knowing what it looks like, it's a huge difference in speed, right? And how do you create that top box? Football fans. I don't know, Pac-10 country football fans, show of hands. Okay, good number. So another reason why when we have a shared mental model, it can have huge implications on speed. Oregon Ducks. So I don't know, there's probably any Oregon Duck fans. Yeah, we're a little too far south, I think. So there's a couple. All right, so help me out. But Chip Kelly. So if you look at the Oregon Ducks, one of the most prolific offenses in the country over the last 5 years. And so for everybody else in the conference, they're probably happy he left, went to Philadelphia, I think. But if you look at what he did, and you kind of see this is how they called in plays. Just essentially symbols. And the reason why this was so important, Oregon Ducks ran plays in an average 13 seconds, which was about half the time that most other college teams run plays. Which also means that over the course of a game, they're able to run, I forget the exact number, like 76 plays versus like 53 plays in terms of offense, right? But in order to be able to pull that off, you got to get the play in 5 seconds, and the traditional methods weren't working. So visual symbols, rapid ability to communicate was very, very powerful here. And the other benefit of that was, once you run plays at that pace, guess what? The defense is forced to think entirely differently. And so there's reasons behind the most prolific offense, but the ability to gain speed was driven by a new and different way of using visualization to gain rapid speed. Very creative, very innovative. And as you can see, they had lots of fun with it too. And so we'll get into some of the visualization a little bit later on as well, but very, very powerful. We talk about shared mental model. It has execution speed implications. The third item, own the whole before your piece. This maybe, I'll only talk about this briefly, but might be the single most important one. And I can pretty quickly tell how effective an organization is in terms of their ability to execute. And what that really means is, in a nutshell, I was out on the West Coast working with an organization a while ago, but this is really holding true. This is a technology company where the individual IQ was easily 140, and collectively they averaged 72. Yeah, but it's hard to do, right? Especially, we're so used in our organizations. Most of us have grown up working north-south, but we're living in an increasingly matrixed world. And the east-west relationships become really important, which means managing through influence as much as managing through authority. It's a really difficult thing to do. Here's a pharma company we've worked with. When we visualized it, this was how they created strategy, and it created huge issues. We called it the stovepipe syndrome. So you had the different functions or the business units creating their strategy, serving it up, and then we tried to reconcile it at the top. We called it potluck strategy. They're all good, and you just hope the dinner sort of worked out, right? Hopefully it all sort of makes sense. The ability to work east-west, and for leaders to get comfortable working east-west and managing through influence is really, really critical. And it's a really hard thing to do, and it's not what made most of us successful in terms of how we got here. So the natural ability to reach out and connect the dots is a really good indicator of how effective and how agile you are in terms of your execution speed. And you're going to have a lot of that going on, right? And new roles, new things, how do we reach out? Making that a proactive effort and being really conscious of that is really, really important. So own the whole before your piece. Number 3. And what this requires is, because a lot of times everybody just waits for somebody else to go first. So you've got to be willing to give something up, right? Because you give up control when that happens. So you've got to be willing to give something up and in order for the whole to gain. All right? Number 4. Seen in great organizations is, unless leaders made it personal, it got stuck. Meaning if it was intellectual for us and emotional for everybody else, it wasn't going to work. It didn't seem authentic. It wasn't real. And what's really important here is the need to change is not an indictment of past performance, and it does not invalidate years of earlier behavior. Because we changed right now doesn't mean what we did in the past was bad. It's just not important or relevant now in order to be successful in the future. And that, especially the higher up we are in an organization, can be really difficult. Because what do you mean you're asking me to do things differently? For 20 years, I was enormously successful doing it a certain way. Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what's now needed in order to win tomorrow. But that's emotionally difficult. And it's for your leaders, for you, and for the next level down. And so to be really clear and comfortable with that, it's not an indictment of the past. And that in many ways we're further than we've ever been, but we're just not yet where we know we can be. That's the mindset that becomes really important to have self-awareness around and then communicate that. And to be really truthful about that. We were with a large conglomerate about 10 years ago, something like that. And we were doing strategy work, actually, 60,000 person conglomerate. And the way it ultimately came together, we had a top 150 meeting at the Breakers in Florida. For those of you who've been, nice place. So they kind of did it up big. And we had like a 2-day session working through the strategy, working through all the key elements. And and then at the end of the day, we're all feeling pretty good. And then we were stupid enough to have the anonymous automatic response system devices. I think we're all familiar with. And we said, okay, the question we're now going to ask, and this is sort of the right into the sunset question. Given all that we've talked about with our strategy, how many of you would recommend our stock to friends and family? yeah, he knows what's coming. What do you think the answer was? 22%. So we thought, wow, we're fired. That's not a good number. But to the credit of the chairman and CEO, he said, now wait a second, I'm feeling good about the strategy. This is deeper than that, right? And go research what this could be. And so we started asking questions, and we dug a little deeper. And essentially, and we drew what we saw, which was this. This was the leadership behavior we saw. And fundamentally, in a nutshell, what this represents is, what people told us is, we don't have an issue with the strategy. We don't believe that the executives fully believe it and are committed to make it happen. So we don't believe in their conviction. So why should I believe in that conviction, right? And that's where the realism and the truth-telling, the honesty becomes so important, and where you have to challenge your sense of conviction, or if you think your boss doesn't have it, you got to really challenge that. And because here's the kind of things we saw. Non-confrontational water, as you see on there. What we call the masks of management. I've hit my number, leave me alone. Right? Well, we're not going to really talk about the true issues. The biggest conversations took place outside of the meeting rooms. Let's talk in private, right? Let's talk in, you saw the water cooler, different kinds of places. So how good are we at truth-telling? How good are we at having the really honest conversations in the room? Absolutely critical success factor. If you can't have those conversations, it's not going to seem authentic, it's not going to seem personal, it's going to break down. Your behaviors become the pace car for growth and change by being what you expect in others. If you don't live it, they're not going to do it. So you have to figure out, and so if you don't believe it yet, which is possible, you have to ask yourself the question, well, how can I get there? What help do I need? Who do I work with? How do I figure that out? Because it becomes transparent over time, and then that doesn't help anybody, including yourself. It's hard to do. So you can't, if you're not uncomfortable, then you're probably not pushing hard enough. It's not, we call it the dumbass is leading the change, excuse my language, but you have to feel a little bit like, it's okay to not know, right? If you know it all, then that's probably not pushing the change curve hard enough. And because if you have that mindset, other people feel that it's okay to not know as well, and they're going to have conversations. They're going to engage in the dialogue in a different way. And letting go is not easy. Lou Gerstner, who used to, I was with him at a conference a couple of years ago. He tells a really good story where he said, and he really did a wonderful job turning around IBM. Right? When it was essentially a hardware company, and he really turned it into a services organization and a kind of a total solutions, hardware, software, services organization. He had to go through a tremendous amount of change. And he said one of the hardest things, and he told a Tarzan story. It's like, it's the thing he kept seeing is, the single hardest thing is you're holding on to something that you're comfortable with, and you kind of swing, and then there's this moment where you have to let go, where you're not holding on yet to the new way of working, but the old way, you're sort of like in that uncomfortable middle, right? And all too often what can happen to all of us is we kind of go, just one more time. Let me hold on, right? And it's this really hard emotion to let go, but you've got to do it. He said that was one of the key things. I had to make sure people were comfortable doing that, and that's where this not knowing the answers can be okay. And because otherwise you can sort of feel stuck or be passive. And I saw this video. I think this is kind of a funny way of making that point. Yep, I need the video from the gang. You guys good? You can tell a joke, make funny things. There we go. It's kind of funny because it sort of rings true sometimes, right? We've all seen it, and so as we're kind of going through the change, it's easy to kind of be comfortable where we are. So how do we make sure we go first faster, right? We don't want to be that guy on the escalator, because we've all seen it, right? It's this learned helplessness from they to we to me. And because what we're waiting for will never fully come. I'm saying, I need the answers. Well, I need more clarity. Trust me. And you probably do, and it's probably a fair question. At the same point in time, you will probably never get the clarity you fully seek because it's an ongoing journey, right? And so how do you embrace that uncertainty and take that step, get off the escalator? It can be a hard thing to do, especially when you're in the middle of change, but you don't want to be that guy. Last one. So point number 5, I talked about chief engagement officer. How do you get everybody in the game effectively? And how do you make that a conscious point? I talked about the bigger picture and how you fit in. How do you create that story for them? How do you create the puzzle? Because in the end, it's not just about an intellectual connection. This is where we go so often. Here's the facts, here's the data points, here's the 58 PowerPoint slide and the data, but change is emotional. So you have to connect with how people feel, with where their emotions are at, and with how they connect to things. Because if you don't, it's going to be so much harder. Because it's not about the brightest few. In the end, the execution is not just about you guys. It's about that next level and the next level after that. That's going to determine the success. And you've got to own that. And never doubt that a small group of people, I love this quote, of thoughtful, committed people can change the world indeed. It's the only thing that ever has. And so the power of a dedicated group can have an enormous impact. I'm going to show you, one more video, and then we're going to get working. But I'm sure you probably all know, the concept of a flash mob. Right? It's people getting together in like a public place, and all of a sudden they start, doing funny things, and it looks really cool, kind of thing. Well, the video I'm going to show you is, and a couple of you might have seen it, but it's pretty cool. This was at an Oprah show in Chicago. Had lots of people on it, and they surprised her with the flash mob concept. So there were 80 professionals that were trained in a certain way of moving things, and those 80 professionals got with 800 people and gave them some basic instructions, right? And then you'll see what happens from there. But the point on that is a small group of dedicated people wanting to make something happen can have an enormous influence, enormous power. And this is just a fun way of illustrating that. So we're going to run that. I know they're going to run that different. We're going to run that next video if we can. It's about 3 minutes or so, but it's fun. So that looked like fun, didn't it? Every time I see it, I sort of get the goosebumps. It's very cool. But the main point here is, and it's obviously more the a non-connected example, but few folks committed to something. People want to be inspired. People want to follow. People want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. People want to be in the game, right? And a few committed folks who are dedicated to making a difference can really move the needle pretty significantly, right? And that's kind of what this is all about. And so as you think about engagement, once again, 5 things to keep in mind. Hopefully some of those are, as you think about your own leadership style and how to engage and how to drive the change, hopefully some of those are helpful in that process, right? The roots of engagement, creating common mental models, owning the whole and working east-west. How do you make it personal, and how do you get everybody in the game? Absolutely critical elements. What we'll do next, so that was a bit of sharing. Now we're going to go into getting your input into, helping us do that within your organization. And so I'm going to ask my colleague, Kim, to come up and kind of work us through the next phase of the afternoon. So thank you.